2020. Wow, what a year, huh? I mean, we may have foreseen it would be of some significance as the beginning or the end of a decade, right? However, I bet very few of us predicted the meme-filled crazy show it has turned out to be, right? What amazes me the most in library land is the continual focus on patron needs and the near constant innovation all of you are engaged in to meet those needs. That is quite impressive. And I hope there's someone in your community letting you and your staff know how much you are appreciated. Because all of us here at Illinois Heartland Library System certainly see you and recognize the excellent work you do on behalf of your patrons every day. Thank you. Thank you very much. Whoops, something just fell off my desk. Anyway, before I introduce our special guests, and they're going to introduce themselves this morning, just a few housekeeping points for our meeting today. Please mute your mics and turn your cameras off during the presentations. You will have an opportunity to ask questions following the Illinois State Library update and also during the system updates. And if you're new to Zoom or you haven't been to one of these meetings in a while, you can put questions and comments in the chat as we go along. Okay? So speaking on working on behalf of library patrons, our colleagues at the Illinois State Library have also moved to improve library resources as well as broaden access across the state. Here to tell us more is Greg McCormick, the director of the Illinois State Library. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning, Leslie, and thank you for the introduction. Joining me here at the State Library today in our meeting room is Joe Natale, our Chief Deputy Director. I expect that we may have a couple of other staff members from the Library Development Group join us as well. And I hope everyone can hear me through our mask, but because of the protocols that we must go through and be in the same room together, I'm going to have to keep this on as we go through the meeting. Joe also joins us because part of what I am discussing with you today is already been filed for the first filing of the administrative rules that's regarding the non-resident services for public libraries. We're now in the formal comment period. So Joe will be making a recording of comments regarding that particular section, which we will be compiling along with those comments that we're receiving formally in writing, and those will be submitted to our ethics officer and the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules as part of the process we must go through on the first reading process. So there are several things that I want to discuss with you today, but first of all, I think it is appropriate. I do echo what Leslie just said about the work everyone has been conducting during this rather unusual year, to say the least. It's really is exemplary. I looked this morning through the list of what are IHLS libraries doing right now, and it was interesting to see all the various things that libraries have reported back to the system and the levels of service you're providing in this very, very challenging time we're in right now and the challenging year. So I applaud the work of all of you, and certainly Secretary White does as well. He'll be joining a group later today regarding the Talking Book and Braille service. I don't know if there's anyone on this call that will be participating in that meeting later this afternoon as well. But he's very well aware of what the work that has been going on and the heroic efforts that everyone has put on maintaining library services throughout the state. So I want to speak with you on three particular topics. I don't know that it will take near as long as time as has been allotted today, but we'll be discussing the Public Library for Capita Grant application for FY21. Again, the non-resident administrative rules and the recent Card for Kids legislation that was passed. And then finally, a brief update on the FY21 certification process, where that is in the developmental stages and what libraries can expect for next year. So let's start off with the FY21 Public Library per Capita Grant. Most of you probably, if you're planning on applying, may have already looked at the application as what is expected this year. But I did want to give a bit of a background. As many people know, or most know, the Secretary's budget for FY21 was increased by over $2.6 million to raise the statutory distribution for this program in this fiscal year, and we hope that that would continue into next fiscal year as well. At the same time, the Illinois Library Association released the new Serving Our Public 4.0 standards for Illinois public libraries. And it was also, at the same time, the state library was challenged with developing what were the new requirements for the Public Library per Capita Grant program for FY21 and beyond. Because what we had requested in previous years that has changed from year to year, and last year was, or this current fiscal year was the last that we had anything developed. So we did think it was appropriate to take a look at what was really required in statute and administrative rule. And we believe that the application reflects just that, with no other requirements. And the long-standing legislation, the authorizing legislation for the Public Library per Capita and Equalization Grant Program has indicated that the eligible library will be providing service which meets or shows progress toward meeting Illinois library standards as most recently adopted by the Illinois Library Association. And then, of course, also that they will be levying a tax at the appropriate rate, or in lieu of that tax, their corporate authority is allocating an equitable amount back to the library for its operation within the fiscal year. So we have taken the approach with the application that most have seen, and in fact, we have a number of submissions already on looking at the complete standards document versus piecing a chapter here, taking a chapter from there. And the application simply asks that the applicant library go through the document, review the checklist at the end of each chapter, and then report back on this application where the library stands in relation to those standards, what may need to be addressed during this fiscal year, or what may be addressed in a future time period. You're also, of course, asked to report on the use of the FY19 grant, which was 2 years ago, and expenditure was expected to be concluded by December 31st of 2020, just a couple of weeks from now. The application due date, obviously there was significant change, so we have modified that at least for this fiscal year, moving the due date to March 15 of 2021. And I expect that we may look at moving that back to January in subsequent fiscal years, but because of the timing, communication with everyone, because of the pandemic, just a lot of other things, it just seemed appropriate to move that due date this year. It's really rather straightforward, I hope. The applications that we've seen, and I actually read a couple myself, everyone seems to be comfortable with that and what it says. And I would, at this point, I think it may be easier if someone has a question on this particular piece, it maybe ask that now, or if there's a question in chat. I cannot see the chat as I sit here. So if there's a question, if someone could read that back to me.
Greg, it's Ellen. All I have, Diane Foote chimed in that the copies of Serving Our Public are back ordered. We've arranged with Diane to do another bulk order for the system so we can pass out some discounts. And if Diane gets them Wednesday, we should have them maybe in about 10 days.
Muted. Oh,
Wonderful.
that's funny. They may plug something in.
Diane just said, we'll get them on Wednesday.
Perfect. So if there are no further questions on that topic, I think we'll move.
There is one. There is one.
Okay.
Just came in. If you would repeat the deadlines you mentioned.
March 15 of 2021 for this year's grant application.
Okay, nothing else, Greg.
Okay.
Okay, so we will move right into the next section then about non-resident public library services and the administrative rules that are currently under their first filing notice, and what all is included within that. So again, many of you are aware of what was called the Cards for Kids legislation that was passed in Public Act 101-632, which, as I've advised to everyone, it was an amendment within a greater bill, or included within a greater bill, that amended the Local Library Act and the Public Library District Act. I think it's also important to note that that legislation passed with unanimous consent and was effective immediately. And it simply, the amendment regarding the non-resident library services in the Local Library Act and the Public Library District Act indicates that a non-resident in an unincorporated area in Illinois who is a student whose household falls at or below the U.S. Department of Agriculture's income eligibility guidelines isn't to be charged the non-resident fee that the library may have established once they determine they're offering non-resident services to those who live outside of their typical library service area. Waiving the fee itself is a requirement once a local library and the library board have determined to offer those non-resident cards. And the rules that have been enacted or incorporated are simply an explanation of what we understand the legislation to mean and how a library would implement that process at the local level. There were several other things that were included in that legislation, but I think I'll remain focused, or I should say several other things that were included in the administrative rule filing, but I will focus first on the Cards for Kids issue since we're already there. So within it, there's a definition of student and what we understood that to mean based upon what was placed in the legislation regarding the income eligibility guidelines from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And that leads one right to the free and reduced school lunch program. And so within the current language of the administrative rule, student is defined as an individual currently enrolled in a public or nonprofit private school K through 12 who does not have his or her principal residence within a public library service area. And so this was not to be considered, as many people I think have assumed, that this is a new program. This is really an exemption from the fee. It's really going to be up to the local library, because we know that some are taking a very proactive approach to assuring that these library services are extended to eligible students. But the rule reflects that when a library is faced with an applicant that would qualify under these guidelines, that the fee is simply waived. An overriding concern that was expressed when this legislation was originally considered as a separate piece or a separate bill was that, a local library would be looking at and documenting income levels of households. And the administrative rules indicate that the applicant would be required to provide from their school or school district information that they are participating in the free or reduced school lunch program, which they would be applying for. It's our understanding at the time they register for the school session. If a school, really, and this would be where a school district operates under the community eligible provision, which is a designation that the entire student body falls under that category, it may make it a bit easier for a public library to address this, because you can assume that everyone that is applying under this guise, there's no further documentation that would be necessary as long as you had regular update from the school district that that's how they're operating. Again, this doesn't change necessarily the non-resident card itself. All other provisions that a library may have in place for your regular patrons would still be applicable even within this category. Any policies or guidelines, because there are some libraries in the state that do have policies and guidelines already established for issuing cards to minors, those would remain in place as well. It's simply a matter of if it's a non-resident student that falls within this guideline, the fee would not be charged. We have looked at, since this was developed, what the impact might be statewide, and based upon an estimate of roughly 1 million people, but I will be honest, we do feel that that is going to go down significantly after this current census is certified. And looking at the portion of the percentage of the people in the state who reside outside of library services areas, look at the student population, and currently statewide, approximately 48.5% of the student population falls within this eligibility category. And you start doing some mathematics, you come back to statewide. I think today, we think there may be 76,000 students that might apply, or might 76,000 students that might fall into this category. An earlier calculation that was conducted and reviewed with Diane Foote and I from the Illinois Library Association, there was an estimate at that time about 60,000 possible students statewide. But again, it's not an automatic registration into public library services. It's when they come to you seeking that library card. So within the non-resident services administrative rule filing also, there is another section regarding e-resources to non-residents. This particular issue came up specifically during the pandemic when we were approached at the state level on.
I'm sorry to
Go ahead.
interrupt, but there's a whole lot of questions on your non-resident stuff, Greg. Do you think we could answer all them first
Sure.
before you go to e-resources?
Yeah, I can't see them, but yeah, go right ahead. If someone will system will monitor those and ask the questions.
Greg, I'll feed them to you in the order they came in. And the
Okay.
first one is from Bobby Perryman from the Vespasian Warner Public Library. Are we able to put restrictions on that card, not allowing other members in the household to use that card?
I think that you have to be cautious with that because it's a non-resident card. I think that if a library is issuing or has developed a policy for cards to minors, that would be allowed under the way the administrative rules. So I think this will lead many libraries to go back and look at what those cards or what they might put in place as a regular practice, whether it's a resident or non-resident of the service area.
Okay, from John Howard at Muhammad. Is there a best practice document for public libraries to use in implementing the Cards for Kids program?
We have not implemented a best practice document in the whole area of non-resident services. We are in the process of modifying what was the old FAQ regarding non-resident services, which also included information about reciprocal access, reciprocal borrowing, and interlibrary loan. We made a decision earlier this week to split those, where there will be a non-resident FAQ and then a reciprocal borrowing, reciprocal access, and interlibrary loan FAQ. We'll make it shorter and I think a bit easier for a library to use. Now, that being said, the FAQ is a living document, and as we have received formal comments already, we know that there are some questions that we already need to modify our first draft and include in the FAQ. So I would say that as soon as we get this through this comment period, we'll have the consistent questions identified for inclusion in this, and so I think that will assist with the development if a best practices document needs to be further implemented. And that too would probably be something that we would have the regional library systems work with the state library for their members.
Okay, the next question is from Jill, and it has to do with where a student would apply for this card. And she quotes section D, if your non-resident student who qualifies is served by a high school or municipality other than your own, where do they get their card from? For example, K-8 kids are in my municipality, but the high school is in another district located in another municipality. Are they applying to where the school district is located or where they live if those are different? Please clarify the language to reflect the intent.
Well, the intent was to keep the location consistent with where they are under the regular, whether this was a Cards for Kids applicant or not. I think there was so much in that question, Ellen, I would ask that that gets submitted to Joe and we can look at that a little more closely.
Okay, we'll do that. To clarify, if you do not sell non-resident cards, you are not required to participate in Cards for Kids. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, this is another one. This is another one similar to the one I think Jill submitted. My library district does not follow the borders of the school district. It's based on the current non-resident rule that the household goes to the public library that is in the school district. And if
according to the current administrative rules, they should go to the library that is within the school district seeking this, if they're seeking this type of card. Again, there is a role for the library systems in sorting out, some questionable service areas on that. And so maybe that question too should come to Joe as well. It seems that's obviously going to be something we're going to have to make sure is clarified in the FAQ.
Okay. From Teresa, our school district serves free lunch to all. Will the school still need to provide the needed lunch eligibility?
The applicant would not if they're a non-resident because you're aware, so they're serving it under the community eligible provision.
Okay. From Donna Shaw, do they only qualify for electronic resources or can they come into the building and check out items?
Under the cards for kids component of this, they are it's like any other non-resident card issued to a patron. It's just, in this case, it's for a card issued free of charge to a qualified K through 12 applicant.
Okay, from Diana Sussman. If a school declares their whole population is eligible, is there some alternative documentation we can require so that we don't lose the entirety of our non-resident fee income? Just because a significant portion of the population qualifies, that doesn't mean every individual family is actually impoverished.
I think in that case, I mean, she makes a good point about that, but it's where it's going to be very important for a library in that situation to have developed a policy about a card for minors and what that is allowed, what use is allowed with that.
From the Sherman Public Library. What happens when two public libraries share one school district? How to determine which library issues the card?
I think, again, that's going to be something we're going to have to clarify in the FAQ and with the regional library system. In that case, it really is probably going to end up being which library is closest to the residence of the applicant.
Thank you. From Rick Balsamello, if these non-resident student cards allow the same privileges of ILL and reciprocal borrowing, who becomes responsible for fees incurred by the loss of materials by these non-resident students? Do they not pay the fees?
It's the same as the responsibility that exists for other non-resident cards now.
Okay. From Teresa, how do we prove eligibility for homeschool students?
Well, right now, homeschool students are not included in this provision, and that's because it is our understanding there's no designation for that under the free and reduced school lunch program. This would go back directly to, and this is a question that has been raised, if that is considered at some point, libraries would need to verify income levels of that household. And I don't know how that is yet to be addressed, or if it can be.
Okay, Bill Pixley asked a question about, he said they have to go to the nearest library. Can a list be made so each library knows what district goes to which library?
I think, again, that needs to come back here in writing, and we can include that.
And Greg and Joe, I believe we can capture this chat and highlight the questions that all have to do with geography and where to get the cards, because that seems to be a concern. For Marion Petersburg, the entire state had allowed free lunches for students for the entire year this year. How will that affect this rule?
So I think what you said, the entire district allows free or reduced lunch.
Yes.
So in that case, an applicant from that school district would get the free card. Again, I would think the library needs to really have a policy in place regarding the cards for minors and what that really means.
Okay, I'm sorry, this is Marion. I keep trying to send a message and I don't know what the problem is, but I can't get my message to come up. So basically, I'm wondering if there can be restrictions or exceptions made to these rules. Mosquito, while a small town, is a huge school district. Whoever planned these boundaries years ago, I actually have a grade school in the Belleville city limits. So how does that work? Does Leander have to take care of those students?
I think, Marion, that's something we're going to have to include in this FAQ document. if they were a non-resident applicant traditionally, the way it's written, where do they seek their card from now if they weren't a student?
Well, like the one school, they would get it from the city of Belleville, but Belleville's a city library. I'm a city library, and so we have a lot of unserved between us.
Sure.
And so a lot of subdivisions out in the country that don't belong to any city. I could see this getting really, really ugly. And I don't know. Like I said, I definitely am going to need some guidance, Lee and I both, as to how this gets handled.
Sure. The geography issue is going to be a challenge in many, for many libraries and communities, as you indicate, but we will work on that.
Okay, Greg, we have another question from Lisa. How do we stop them from checking out for the rest of their family? What do I tell my taxpayers who do support the library financially?
I think that, again, that goes back to establishing a policy for what the cards for minors is supposed to be. That, the non-resident card itself allows a patron to check out anything, but the administrative rules do indicate that policies and guidelines can be established by the local library. I know that there are some even within Heartland, as we looked at what policies have been established for use of the library by minors, the consent that is necessary, but it's not consistent throughout library by library. There's no statewide consistency to that, nor should they, because it's a local decision.
Okay. Somebody said, what are the penalties if we're not doing this yet?
Well, I would say that there's no penalty stipulated, but ultimately, a library is to be compliant with the statutes and rules governing their type of institution to be a member of the regional library system and therefore get their services, etc. That would be the ultimate concern with that.
Okay. We also got, I've also asked for clarification on the fact that the free lunch went to all students in the whole state this year. So does that have any impact?
I was not aware that was the provision this year.
It says the entire state had allowed free lunches for students the entire year this year. And a couple people have chimed in on that.
We will investigate that with the State Board of Education because I did look at their website when we were reviewing for these meetings.
Okay. Jill Shart said we currently do not limit what types of material a youth card can check out. The only way we can restrict cards for kids to only have access to youth material is to limit all youth cards?
That's correct, because a non-resident card has to be issued with the same privileges that you issue a card to your resident.
Okay. Somebody asked about this needing to go into a library's policy manual, and some wording would be really helpful.
Okay.
And then people are commenting about the number of questions. And finally, Esther Curry said, so only kids in school districts in our library district are the ones we need to provide for?
Could you repeat that, Helen?
Sure.
Ellen, I didn't.
Sure, not a problem. So Esther's saying, so only kids in school districts in our library, so only school districts within the Mount Vernon Public Library District are the ones that they need to provide cards for?
Correct. It would be consistent with what the non-resident service area is already defined in the administrative rule.
Okay, some people, Bobby said, they're still waiting on on policy guidance more than anything else. Esther said, thank you. Teresa said, this is well-meaning, but it is going to be a challenge to implement locally.
And we understand that the need for the FAQ on non-resident services is probably greater than ever right now. So,
okay, that's
Sorry, like I said, I don't know what's happening, and I apologize again. I can't get my questions to pop up. This is Miriam again, and I have a concern with the 18-year-old because an 18-year-old is an adult, so they're checking out adult materials. Now, can we limit them not to check out games? Like if we'd make a policy, would we get in trouble if we limit them and say you can't check out movies? Or, I mean, we have games and stuff too. And it can only be, books, that type of materials. Can a policy say that? Or would we, because non-resident doesn't restrict that, but if we made a policy for these cards that said you can only check out this, that would be legal?
I think that whatever policy you develop, Marion, has to be consistent with what you do for your resident policy. So the issue is, what is your card for minors policy going to indicate? And again, some libraries have a policy going up to a certain age level, and it does not reach the level of 18. But it has to be consistent for residents and non-residents.
okay. 2 more questions, Greg. Is this something we have to advertise?
It's not. I think that, it's something that you're going to have to be, right now, technically, the law is effective. So if a library was approached, and a student applicant gave you the appropriate documentation, you would have to implement it. And until the final version of these is adopted by the joint committee, we offer this as, this is guidelines on how you would operate right now. So it's not something that you advertise unless, like some other libraries in the state are going to proactively go out and address this with the non-resident community within the school district they serve.
Okay, another one from Diana Sussman, again, who has a concern. Within our city limits, the majority of students qualify for free lunches. There's a good chance our school district has declared free lunch for all. Our non-resident population is wealthy. Are we not allowed to request some other proof of poverty? If not, we're going to lose about $20,000 in non-resident fees annually.
I don't know how one would address that. I mean, I think, Diana, that's a comment that if you would send that to Joe, we can include it in our filing. And we'll look at what might have to be done. Right now, it would be my understanding that, those cards would be issued free of charge if that's what the Carbondale School District has done.
And finally, from John Howard and Muhammad again, not a question, but a comment. Obviously, there are lots of questions and details to work out here, but in the end, it's about making library services more available to those in need. So I think it's a good thing because getting resources to those who need the most is what we are about.
I do thank everyone for your comments and questions, and if there's something that you do, again, if you do have other questions, please send those to Joe Natale here at the State Library. There's a couple of other areas we want to discuss regarding the non-resident services, so we'll move into the e-resources piece, which began, again, during the pandemic. It was a question that was posed to the State Library. What might public libraries do to, at that time, support the education, which also was being closed throughout the state as schools were being closed? what could libraries do to assist patrons? And so we took that back to our legal counsel in review of what could be done under existing law. And specifically, libraries were wanting to allow e-resource access or some e-resource access. And our legal counsel's review did indicate that would be permissible, the way the current law reads. And so we took that information and have it incorporated it into the service to non-residents in this first filing for the administrative rules, as much to document that and to answer the question that was posed to us, and so that there's a consistent message that what might be permissible across the entire state. And so there's, given within the first filing that I believe Ellen has shared with everyone within the meeting, there's a definition of what the e-resources could be. There are examples that can be included, that it's not limited to, but that essentially, similar to what you do for non-resident services, a public library and their board could determine on an annual basis that they're going to allow access to e-resources by non-residents of the library service area. The library and the library board would define what those e-resources exactly are. And that in and of itself might be a challenge. Certainly, one of the first considerations will be, what do your contracts with vendors and providers of those services allow for? What is the capacity of the library to do this? This is not necessarily a card. It would be up to the library to determine what that is, but this access is limited. This is not a non-resident card, whether issued under your regular terms or under the Cards for Kids provision. So it's simply an extension of what the public library might do for the greater area outside of their library service area. And it's really, again, it is an optional service that might be offered, but it was determined by our legal counsel that that could be permissible, but it does not afford the individual all of the other services that the public library provides. Any questions about that specifically?
We've got a number of questions.
Okay.
Okay, the first one's from Tina Hubert. Regarding the e-resource access to non-residents, does this only apply to people who live in an area not served, taxed by any public library? I ask because while we don't have non-resident areas in Illinois, since our boundaries are next to Missouri, and while we don't have Illinois non-residents in our general area, some of the library boundaries that touch our library boundary, I'm sorry, that touch our, I'm sorry. Some of the library boundaries that touch our libraries, I'm just trying to grab that, do not provide the same level of e-resources to their patrons. Does this new law allow our board to then extend e-resources access to folks who live in another library service area? How does that then impact the law regarding contracting services between libraries?
Well, it does not include that. The way it's stated right now in the administrative rule, because it would be action you're offering to non-residents, which non-resident then is defined within the administrative rule as an individual who does not have their principal residence within a public library service area.
Okay. Her second question is, how does the e-resource law impact e-resource licensing agreements and fees?
Well, again, it would be, this is what the administrative rule might allow a public library to do. It will be up to the public library to review what those licensing agreements state. If it's based upon a projected number of patrons, if it's projected upon a defined population, whatever those arrangements are. And of course, those would have to be put in place and everything agreeable before this actually could be implemented by a library.
Okay, and I'm going to share all the questions with you, Greg, just so I don't miss anything.
Okay.
Jill says, my main concern with the free e-resource card to non-residents is where consortial database arrangements are concerned. I would like to see language included limiting the free card to standalone databases, as well as the requirement for an issuing of an entirely different library card barcode with a unique prefix numbers that only allows access to a library's standalone databases.
Again, we believe that the administrative rules would allow a library to develop that policy as they see appropriate.
Okay, somebody else seconded Jill's question, and then Bobby Perryman said, here's my serious concern with this ruling. E-resources are our most expensive service. The James Patterson book that cost me $15 from my book supplier costs $65 in ebook form. I can circ that $15 book as many times as I want. I can only circ the $65 book 26 times before I have to buy another $65 license. 26 times before I have to, yeah, that was repeated. I'm sorry. My patrons who are paying for this expensive service might not get to read the James Patterson book if all the circs are taken up by non-resident users. Plus, we are in a consortium. What if my library doesn't agree to allow e-access, but another library in the consortium does? I'm still buying that $65 book, but non-resident patrons from XYZ library could use up all the circs before my patrons had a chance.
Again, I think that each local library will have to determine what is feasible for them to engage in, and indeed, ebooks might not be part of their offering.
Okay, and Marion said, Donna Shaw echoed that concern. Marion Albers said, we have a database called Hoopla, where every time a person downloads an item, the library incurs a charge. This could be very damaging to me, and I may have to discontinue due to the rising costs, but my tax-paying patrons love this database.
And again, it may be something that, that at that library, they determine it's just not feasible for them to do.
Okay, Diana Sussman chimed in and as I understand it, we do not have to implement free non-resident cards for e-resources. Am I correct in my assumption, or that this is voluntary?
No, she's correct. It's not something that must be implemented. It's what a library might entertain doing.
Okay. From Jill, while the rule change stipulates no traditional library use, again, we have an issue with the technical side of this. Once you give a person a library card number, they have access to all services. It is not limited. It is not known if our Polaris software can restrict a patron from placing holds in the catalog or checking out material once they have a card number.
And I think we will have to work with Cassandra and IHLS regarding that issue.
Okay,
I can chime in. We can do a lot of things on our software to make this work if libraries choose to do it, but we will require some conversations between the Share Circulation Committee and the Share Executive Council.
okay, this was from Bill Pixley, or to somebody wants verification on clarifying optional again. What they said was this is optional only if you do not offer non-resident cards.
It's optional regardless. This is not something that has to be implemented, whether a library issues resident cards or non-resident cards. This isn't even included in it's very carefully stated that it's e-resources to non-residents, and it's separate from the whole area of non-resident cards being issued.
Donna Shaw says, my library consortium for e-resources can't keep up with the hold queue as it is. An overdrive won't allow for mergers of the multiple consortiums through IHLS. If a large library who has more financial resources decides to go for this, we are really hurting our tax-paying person. And Kyla from Mississippi Valley says, just to clarify, when our board considers annually whether to provide non-resident accounts, at that time the board can determine that traditional non-resident services will be allowed, but e-resources provided free under this rule change would not be allowed.
That's correct.
Okay. Jill says, Greg, are you saying that the e-resource consortium can create these limiting provisions?
Yes, that's what I understand, yes.
Okay, more clarification about the optional focus of this rule change. To be clear, this change would allow us to do this or would require me to do this?
It would allow you to do it.
Okay. Rick Meyer points out that he can use an e-resource, you can make an e-resources only card. And I guess Marion said, and does her library have to vote on this in the same way they vote on non-resident fees on an annual basis?
The rule is written that you would vote on it if you determine you're going to move forward with this.
Okay.
Hey, Ellen, this is Jill. Can I ask a quick question to Greg?
Sure.
Sorry, I hit enter before I finished my thing. I asked the question about can an e-resource consortium create limiting provisions? And what I meant was, let's say our cloud library consortium decided we did not want to allow for another library in that consortium to allow a non-resident who is using an e-resource only card to have access to the consortial database. Is that something we would be allowed to do or we could discuss as an option? Because my concern isn't my standalone databases, my concern is for the enormity of the cloud library, and, while there may be, several libraries who don't want non-residents who don't pay to have access to that database, there may be others who do, and it's already a stressed e-resource anyway. So I'm just wondering if there can be some kind of consortial conversation amongst that group to decide whether or not we want to allow this access into it or not.
Well, I think that's in the same vein as what we discussed about what a library would decide as permissible within the contractual arrangements that they have. And you make a good point that within the consortium itself, the libraries need to have that discussion to determine what's going to be the best policy.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay, Greg, it's relatively quiet.
Okay. All good questions. And again, we appreciate that. So the last piece of this regarding non-resident services is a little, I guess, a bit easier and a bit more straightforward. And this is really regarding the veterans tax exemption that is allowed. And this isn't really about library law, but it's in what was initiated by the Illinois Department of Revenue. This has come up a couple of times in the last few years regarding a non-resident applicant for library services who is not required to pay property taxes because they have a 70% disability as a result of their service. And we have included this as clarification within the administrative rules that if they are indeed an applicant and qualify with documentation from their county, that they should not be charged the non-resident fee as a property owner. They are not paying for any of their other services on their tax bill that are typically afforded, and the library card would be consistent with that. So we've had to address that on a library by library individual case. It's honestly a question that rarely comes up, but each time it does, there's such a time span, we have to go back and review this. So it's now incorporated so that everyone can see it and understands what it says. The applicant they have to apply for that at the county each and every year, and they would provide the library with the documentation that they receive from the county that ends up abating the entire amount of their EAV under the county's qualifications.
Jill just asked that question, but I think you've answered it, Greg.
Okay.
This is Mary, and I'm having issues again. So what I'm wondering is this, if we don't offer a non-resident card, would we still be required to give these cards?
No,
This
because
is
they would only be coming to you as an applicant for a non-resident card.
okay. And because we're right by Scott Air Force Base, we're a huge military community, very huge.
Sure.
But we are a city library, and I know when they passed the property tax thing, our EAV went down millions, and I had to cut my budget by 20-some thousand. But so I have a concern about this because there's a lot of subdivisions, outside the limits of military personnel with this who've taken advantage of the disability. So basically, if I provide non-resident cards, then I have to provide this. But if I don't provide non-resident cards, I would not have to honor this. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And Bill Pixley just wanted clarification that this is for non-residents, not residents, correct?
That's correct, because presumably the residents are already not paying. They've filed the information with the county, but the library probably doesn't even realize that.
Nothing else on that, Greg?
Oh, hold on really quick. This is Jill. Sorry, I'm confused by this language and I thought it'd be easier to say it. Under that section D number 1, it said the non-resident fee shall not apply to the unmarried surviving spouse of a veteran. Well, if they're not
Correct.
married, then how are they a spouse?
Well, that's what is in the legislation, so.
Because it's kind of contradictory, because then when you get to it says
right.
Well, actually it's number 3 where it says qualifying veterans or surviving spouses. So it says surviving spouses.
Yeah, the surviving spouse must also remain unmarried to qualify for this. So we can take a look at maybe a clarification of that. I understand the confusion.
I don't
There
know.
were
That's a little confusing.
In the event of the qualifying veteran's death,
Sorry.
survivor still qualifies as long as they remain unmarried.
okay. And Bill Pixley asked again, is this just for people in his county?
It's just for people that you would issue a non-resident card to under the current non-resident rules on where a non-resident would apply for public library service.
Okay, we had some questions. Marion asked, how do you know who the spouse is? Do they have documentation?
Again, this comes from the county. The documentation that they would supply to you has already gone through the county clerk's office.
Got it. So if Marion says no to non-residents, can those people go shop for another library? Or no, because they don't qualify because they aren't in the school district?
I think that that's an issue. That's where the administrative rules and the law bring the regional library system in to help make that determination on where those people go.
Okay. And then just lots of conversation about the use of surviving spouse. language.
We can look at that, and maybe a clarification is warranted in that. So.
It's
Is
quiet.
that for an update from here?
Do you want to talk about certification?
Oh, geez. I guess I did miss something. Thank you, Ellen. Very briefly about certification, 2021 certification process. So, typically that certification has gone through the Illinois State Library. This year, we are hopeful, and I think it will still come together with the new L2 platform and its design, that libraries will certify through the L2 process directly to the library systems. That's the purpose of certification. It's regarding membership within the regional library systems. There will be, some obvious changes with some questions, but it seems all to be clear. The two regional library systems and the state library have been working on implementation of that. There's still a couple of questions. I think we're ironing the last of those out. The biggest change will be the time frame that's being moved to February 15 and all the way up to May 15 of 2021 to assure that the new system is, can be fully implemented, and to make awareness with everyone that is a requirement to do this. Everyone will remember that certification was suspended this past year due to the pandemic, but in the end, we had well over 90% of the libraries certified. So we still do have a good record of that information that we may need to use for outreach to certain institutions for the FY21 implementation of that. It is likely then too that, obviously part of this is also the Interlibrary Loan Statistical Survey, and extending that due date as well to May 15, so that those dates coincide with each other, because it's almost a two-part process. So more information to come through Heartland and Rails for their members, but it should be a good thing for everyone. So,
Greg, there were a couple more comments, not about certification, although we'll wait to see if we get any of those. A couple of comments about real concerns about what the e-resources and what the Cards for Kids program is going to cost libraries sort of in the vein of an unfunded mandate. So there is some real concern about this, and I can tell everybody who's participating in this meeting that we will send a print copy of this chat to Greg and to Joe and to the folks at the state library, so they can certainly see everybody's concerns.
certainly, and I want to emphasize, especially on the piece about the e-resources, in no way is that a mandate. Those considerations of the cost and the impact upon the local library can and should be considered before a library would take action on implementing this at the local level.
And Rick was concerned about libraries dropping out of the non-resident program because of some of this.
I think that that's, a concern that we're aware of, especially with the Cards for Kids issue. I think that we all have to keep in mind, based upon, what we're calculating is our estimate right now of the eligible students, and we obviously do need to get clarification from the state board regarding the statement of statewide eligibility, because that was not our understanding right now. But also in consideration of how many non-resident cards are actually issued statewide. What is reported to us right now from the public libraries is 70,000 for non-residents statewide out of a possible population of nearly 1 million. So that has to be weighed as well, that, you know, if it's not a proactive program that you're reaching out, that, you know, you're responding to probably a smaller percentage of the non-residents that could be eligible in the state.
And 6 Mile Regional Library District echoed what you just said, in the sense that the comment was, it would be interesting to know after this first year, how many students and veterans take advantage of the new law. Sherman Public Library has a concern about the e-resource card for non-residents. This impacts rural and small libraries more than bigger libraries. And a comment from Morrison Talbot from Jamie: the distribution of eligible non-residents is not equitable throughout the state.
Greg, this is Marion, and I realize when you talk money, it's another whole story, but would there be a way, like I said, if we start noticing, you know, some serious impacts with all this free non-resident stuff, would there be a way to set up a pool where we could, let's say, find out what the average non-resident fee is charged, and libraries could possibly once a year be reimbursed for the number from a pool of monies for the number of cards they issued and the impact on their library services? Like I said, because I've got that paying database, you know, that's going to cost me every time they download a book, you know, and yet it's a very popular database. I got a board member who actually loves it. I know monies is always tied in a not silly issue, but would there be a way to create some kind of fund to help libraries? I understand trying to get more people services and make libraries viable, but is it possible? But it comes down to the monies. It always comes down to the monies. And for smaller, and then with COVID, I know my fines, fees, copies, all that stuff's way, way down. You know, I'm losing monies on the, you know, on some of the other things. And so just a thought to consider, if there would be a way to create a fund to reimburse libraries for giving out these services, which would be a win-win. Libraries, people think libraries are awesome, and it wouldn't be killing us financially.
I'm not going to say that that's out of the question. Indeed, that was looked at in the 1990s. And what the average service fee was. We've had those discussions with the regional library systems, and when we've had smaller working groups regarding the unserved at the time. So, you know, I think that, you know, once we have some informed data on the impact and who is actually, again, echoing what Tina just said about what's the impact, who's really applying for this, that may lead to some further discussion on some options. Ultimately, this does address, in some piece, the unserved in our state, which has been a long-term goal of to address that with the regional library systems, the state library, and the Illinois Library Association. So we'll see. I mean, that's a very good point, Mary.
Greg, we'll share these comments with you, but they all revolve around non-resident services. Would the state library ever take a lead on a statewide library tax so no one would be a non-resident and they would be paying a portion? Is this an ILA issue? And then John Howard said, echoing Jill, the better question is, how do we make library cards available to every resident of Illinois, and how do we do so in a responsible way?
Okay, yeah, please share them, and we'll incorporate them into the record of this discussion and the whole comments regarding this first filing.
And one more question, and then we'll switch to pretty quick system updates. And it was just a clarification on the cards for kids. Does it include preschool kids?
We're addressing that. I would say that's now become an FAQ. item.
Okay. Greg and Joe, I'm sure I'm echoing everybody. Thank you for spending this time and working through all these piece parts with us. It helps quite a bit. It helps quite a bit. The next thing on our agenda is a quick system update. So you're going to hear from Susan, you're going to hear from Cassandra Thompson, you're going to hear quickly from Anna and I think if each of us, Susan, Cassandra, Anna and I, if we each take 5 minutes, I think we can get everybody out of here and let Leslie say goodbye to people. So Susan Palmer, do you want to take it away?
Sure thing. Sure. I will be brief. I've only got a couple things. One is that we have switched the quarantine from 5 days. We've gone down to 3 days. I want to give a big shout out to everybody who weighed in on that and the delivery working group. They have really taken that time to go through all the links that we have and to look and to really have great discussion about how we're going to do this. This quarantine time, again, just so that you remember, it's for our system staff. So we are going to quarantine items 3 days instead of the 5 for our own sorting staff before they sort those items and get them back out to you. So I see that as very positive. There's always so many considerations, right, that go into this, and we talked about a ton. But the reality is, yeah, there's loads of things that say that transmission is not the primary way that COVID transfers, but you still have that people element, that human element. And I want to be cognizant of my sorters who have been doing a yeoman's job, as well as the drivers, as well as the libraries. It'll probably take just a couple weeks to see the results of that. We're anticipating beginning that on Monday. So if you already quarantine items in your hub for us, in your library for us, break it down to 3. The drivers will be taking as much as they can. There's space limits, you know that, in our vans and how many we can bring back. There's space limits in our buildings as we bring the items back. And for those of you who we are already inside our hubs, it'll be business as usual. We'll just pick up what you got, but know that those are going to end up being, instead of sitting there 5 days, they'll sit there 3 days. So that's great news. If you want further information, because I know loads of people love those things that we looked at and the links and things, those are on our COVID page on the Illinois Heartland website. That's my first thing. My second thing is that, and I'm going to bring it up so that I don't misspeak, because I make up things in my head sometimes, I guess. IHLS is going to offer a surplus vehicle grant. We had many steps to jump through, but what happens is that as we use our vehicles, and we're very cognizant of keeping our vehicles, safe. So know that these vehicles have been taken care of. Normally we do a surplus vehicle auction. And after offering them to the state library, which is part of that administrative code that we follow that, and they declined our wonderful vehicles, they're still wonderful, they don't have a use for them, then what we normally do is do an auction, and that's open to members. And then after if only we still had vehicles left over from after members having an opportunity to bid on those, which we start the price out really low, then it's open to the public. Well, we're going to change that a little bit, and we're going to use those surplus vehicles that normally are offered to members. We're going to use those to offer a grant. And the grant basically is for libraries who are looking for a vehicle for a community project. It's not meant to, you use the van to deliver to your branches. It's not for that kind of thing. We're looking for that impact back on the community. We are promoting in this grant, the point system and it will be coming out, but the point system, we're going to be looking for, if you've got a cooperative agreement with another library, another community partner, a school district, public library, where you have a cooperative going on. We think that's very important. We also would love to have it be a Wi-Fi access point. As we've seen, there's so many areas of unserved, untaxed, but there's also large areas of people who do not have that Wi-Fi access, or the way that they have that Wi-Fi access requires them to buy something in say a McDonald's. You know, you can't just go and just use their Wi-Fi. They want you to buy something, purchase something. You know, there's all those restrictions. This is more about showing how the library is trying to reach the people during this time, you know, and internet access, it's huge. And it's not just that if there isn't the actual access, but the cost. I mean, it's $90, and $90 can go a long way for some people. Do I do the food? Do I do the internet? And the reality is that many of these schools are requiring students to use that access, the Wi-Fi access, as well as businesses nowadays. They require you to use the internet to submit an application, to find jobs. So we're going to put an emphasis on that. That's one of the main goals too. Or if you're looking at this, vans are quite capable of being a bookmobile type. So you could have the Wi-Fi access as well as have like a small book collection on there, a bookmobile. I encourage you to look at the Association of, oh my gosh, have you ever just had information drop out of your head? So the acronym is ABOS. So it's like Association of Bookmobile and Outreach Services. I feel, look for them. They're on Facebook. They have another group that, you know, you look on their website. They really highlight, and they have so many different ways of using a mobile service to give access to your patrons. I think that's it. I think that's the good news. Were there questions? I'm sorry. I'm not good at always looking.
I'm not seeing anything come in, Susan.
Fab.
I
Thank
bet you'll
you,
get
guys.
some follow-up.
Yeah, that's fine. Reach out at any time. And I stayed within my 5 minutes. Woohoo.
Good job. Cassandra, do you want to take the floor?
Yes, thank you so much. So I do have a few announcements. The big thing is the share membership meeting was on Wednesday, and thank you for everyone who attended. If you were not able to attend, we will be sending out a video recording of that meeting just to get some information from some of our IHLS and share staff about the consortium, about the some of the proposals from some of our committees, and so the reports of what we have been working on this past year. And we also will have a vote. There are 3 items for cataloging libraries, 1 item that's membership system-wide on the change to the medium and large size representative sizes for public libraries. And so we will be sending information about that. That vote will open in on Wednesday. And so we also have announced a common loan working group. It's an optional program where we are going to be making recommendations, because one of the pain points that we have always had is the different loan periods and renewal periods for our members, causing confusion. And so we are going to have a working group that are going to look on that to make recommendations system-wide that libraries can opt into. And with that, we are looking specifically for frontline workers, people who have to answer those questions every day. So our circulation managers and our circulation staff, so they can have that discussion and make those recommendations. So if you're interested in participating, please reach out to Dina Porter. She is going to be spearheading that project. We have added some Simply Reports training in January, so be on the lookout for that. We've also just recently started a cataloging training series for new catalogers that has already filled up. And so that series will end in February, and then we'll begin it again in March. So if you're interested, be on the lookout to get on that next list, or you can contact Shelley Stone just to let her know that you are looking for that. She asked me to remind you all that catalogers are required to complete 15 hours of continuing education per fiscal year. She'll be sending out a reminder in January of what you still might need to have completed. And again, we do have those monthly cataloging training sessions. So those are a great way to get some of those hours in. We're also transitioning some new libraries, including the Gillespie School District, the Bengill Elementary School. She just went there recently. So we've got several libraries that are barcoding and adding records. And then, of course, the big news is the Ebooks Grant that we were awarded from the State Library. Thank you so much, Greg, and the State Library staff, as well as Secretary of State Jesse White. This is Ebooks Grant was funded from the CARES Act via the LSTA and IMLS. And so we were allowed to start spending on December 1, and we spent over $50,000 that day. We've added 1,009 juvenile titles and 725 YA titles to get books to where they're most desperately needed. For the remainder of that grant, we have had volunteers to participate as member library selectors, which, if you're familiar with the Cloud Library, how we do it now, we have libraries that choose to purchase on behalf of the consortium, utilizing the budgeted amount for each library that has available to them to select. So these selectors will actually do, in addition to that normal ordering, they're going to be selecting titles specifically for juvenile and YA titles. And so it's 5 school libraries that are participating, school librarians, and then 1 youth services librarian. And so those selectors will be trying to help us just gain a really diverse collection for our students. And so we're really excited about that. Thank you again, the State Library, for making that possible. So make sure that we can get those materials out to the students who desperately need them. Does anybody have any questions for me?
I don't see anything coming in, but I'm sure everybody knows that they're more than welcome to reach out at any time with any questions or comments.
Absolutely.
I can delve into membership, and what I have to share is really very brief. I just want to thank everybody for participating in Member Day. Excluding IHLS staff, we had 192 participants from 132 unique agencies. So that's a great number, and we're so glad all of you supported us in our attempt to go virtual. And as always, big shout out to all the people who worked on it. But we wanted to let you know that if you weren't able to attend or you missed a session you wanted to see, that the recordings of the video of the Member Day sessions will be posted in the very near future. So watch for them and we'll let you know when that happens. So I can turn it over to Anna, whose brain's been working fast, and she's working on some fun things for the spring. So Anna, do you want to take it?
Okay, thank you, Ellen. I'm hoping my brain is working faster than it has been. Thank you, Greg, and all of the State Library staff for that wonderful information you shared. We've been getting lots of questions, and I think you've answered those, and there's still more answers to come, evidently. But I just wanted to announce, I've been here like almost 3 years, and during that time, I've constantly had people come to me sporadically and ask if they can be a mentor, or if there is a mentoring program in IHLS that connects more experienced directors with newer directors. And I've decided now is the time to form that. I'm looking for a group of volunteers to help me create the structure, procedures, and practices that this group will follow. And so we can get it implemented and start matching people. It's kind of like Match.com for library directors. And then I'm also hoping to have a trustee workshop in the spring on, I'm thinking some sort of fiscal issue, because I know that as we're recovering from COVID, everyone's looking and very concerned about what kind of money will be coming in. You know, these are hard times for everyone, and everyone's very concerned. So I'd like to have something that explains to trustees the legal requirements of their duties, as well as like how to look at these situations without necessarily just like the doom and gloom cut and slash kind of method. So, if you guys have any particular idea on how we can address that, any kind of angles that you hear your trustees voicing, if you have speakers you would like to suggest, please share all of that information with me, and we will be doing interesting things in the spring, hopefully, and we'll all be healthy and well. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Ellen again.
Thank you, Anna. That gives us something fun to look forward to in the spring. So I'm going to turn it back to Leslie, and Leslie can thank you all for coming as we all do and close us up for the day.
Thank you, Ellen. I hope y'all can hear me. Yep. I'm assuming you're shaking your heads yes, because I can't see you. Anyway, on behalf of all of us at IHLS, we wish you and yours a healthy, safe, that's really important this time of year, and peaceful holiday season. And we are thankful for being able to work with all of you. And I just want to give a shout out to our colleagues at Ben Gill Elementary School in Gillespie, Illinois. You all may not know this, but I started out my education career at the Vanille Elementary Center. I think it might have been called, a long time ago, a very long time ago, but I'm super excited anytime we do work in that area of our service, that part of our service area. I know, sorry, a little personal privilege there. Anyway, thanks everyone, and have a lovely weekend coming up. Hope you don't get rained out if you have to put your Christmas lights up, and or holiday lights, and take care, and we'll see you in 2021. Bye-bye.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you, Greg.